Well, hello and thank you everybody for joining me on our inaugural show of the Data Miners Union. And a special thank you goes out to Ruth from Curbal. Ruth, thank you so much for having me on as a guest previous times and your encouragement to actually start up my own channel. For those of you who are out there and caught two of my previous contributions on Ruth's channel, my name is Colin, and welcome to the Data Miners Union. So without much further ado, I'd like to get in. The last video that Ruth and I did together was on column name management, and a wonderful question came up. I would like to thank Rachel Durart for her wonderful question, which I actually thought I had a quick answer to, and it turns out no, she asked an excellent question that I didn't have a good answer to. And what was that question? Well, she said, thank you for the wonderful video. Is there a video posted somewhere on changing data types of columns in bulk in a similar way? She'd be very interested in doing that. Well, I thought I already had the answer, and I gave her a quick answer. Basically saying, yes, the same trick would work because it's a list of lists. And it turned out I was wrong. Because as soon as I posted that, I decided, I need to make sure. So I'll go on and double check. Sure enough, it failed. Actually, it wasn't quite as straightforward. So I said I'd get back to her. And it took me a day or two, but I was finally able to figure out what it was that I needed to do. So, in response to her request, and wonderful question that had me learn something new as well, I'd like to show you the end solution. Let's get into it. Building off of the column management control tables that we were working on before, we have our header names that we want to work with, and we're going to try two approaches. We'll try the original one that I recommended and thought naively would work, and then I'll show you what the final working solution actually looks like. Let's dive into it a little bit and see what it is that we're trying to create. One very common thing most people often do, and I like to do this as well, is control explicitly the column data types that we're working with. And one trick that I've done before is I'd find the columns that I'd like to change. Usually they're date columns. Usually they're not formatted quite the way I want them to, so I want to go and quickly find all of them. So here's the simple trick I did before. What I do is I go and inject a step for choose columns, and I just do a choose columns of date type. Because I happen to know that within this data set, any column that has a date is also got date in its name. So I'll just filter for it, get them down, and I'll highlight all of them. And I just bulk change all of their data types here in one simple way. So I'm going to try to make them all just date types. Excellent. Then I come back up to my previous step where I was filtering for those columns, and I'll get rid of that because I only needed it as an interim step. And now we can see after removing the filter that those three columns that I selected to change to data type are still being listed up at top. So they are being changed, and all of my other columns have come back. These were the steps that I would do before, and they worked fairly quickly. Most of the time I just quickly shift in and find what I need to do. But thanks to Rachel's wonderful question, I thought, is there a better way to do this? Can we use control tables, provide the variable and the data types that we want? And I got initially encouraged, which is why I rushed out and said, yes, Rachel, of course you can do it. Same trick. You'll see why it wasn't quite the same trick right away, but we see here the call is table.transformColumnTypes, providing the source, and then we see the two curly brackets. So this is where I got excited. Yay! Curly brackets, two of them. List of lists. Same trick should work. Awesome. And we see within the two curly brackets, we have the name of the column and then the data type that we're transforming it to. The name of the column, data type, name of the column, data type. So this is where I got all excited. So after telling her incorrectly that by adding a column somewhere in there and naming it data type and just taking that value that you see when you convert the data types. So these ones are dates, so all of them end up with an argument of type date. Well, what about if I change employee to whole number? Well, it ends up adding it over here as employee and int type, int64 type. So I get excited. I'm like, okay, let's go in and do that. So I created a control table out on the main page, same columns, and then I just went in and pasted in what I saw showing up in those arguments. All right, I think we're done. So let's do what we did in the last video where we transposed that list, wrapped it up into a list of lists. Take a quick look in here, and it looks like it's right. We've got type number, right? See if we can replace this entire argument here with what I created there. I'll save you some of the suspense. The answer is no, but let's take a look at why the answer is no. So when I feed the now produced list of lists where I thought I had everything ready, it's giving me an error. It can't actually produce it because it's trying to convert a value of type number to a type of type. And it can't do that. Power Query is not recognizing that value. Well, let's go back into that original call and see what that was and maybe why that is. So I'll just change one of these to a date type so we can see the argument. So let's take a closer look at the list of lists. The first argument, the header, is actually between quotations, so it's text. It's forcing itself as text. The second argument, it's not between quotations, so it's not just a flat text. It is a data object that's being passed in this way. Well, if we go back to the list that we're producing, even though I've typed the data type out correctly, these are direct copies of what that call is, and it's being wrapped up into a list of lists, both arguments are type text. So it was getting confused. I'm passing it a text value where it's expecting a data object. Well, this is where I got a little frustrated and went, oh, why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? Lots of playing around later and a little bit of online searching. I was able to find a trick to manually create a table where the argument in the one section is actually of the object data type that I want. How did I do this? In any case, I was able to find an argument online where you could, through the M language directly create a table. And within that table argument, you give it the column header names here at the top. So my first column is going to be DataTypeName, and then I want another column which is actually the DataType object. And then I just go through and create my rows. So what's the name of that row? And then you notice the name is in quotations because it's text. The second object here, it's not in quotations, it's naked. So it is going to force that data type in that area. What this argument does, and it produces, is this table where now I have a nice human readable object here. I want a whole number, I want a decimal, I want a percent. And right next to it is the data type. That is what I want to be able to pass along in an argument. Well, that's good. How do I use that? Well, how do I use that? Well, a little bit of trickery. What I did was that newly constructed data table that I built in the M language, I did export out to the worksheet. And we can see, yeah, the data type here. That's not really the important part. What I want is these variables here because I want to make it easier for me or easier for an end user if they want to use the tables to explicitly control their data types. And what I've done here is added a new column to my control table. I still have the headers by name here. But under data type, what I've done is added that as a drop-down. We've got data validation turned on where it's taking the variables from the data type name and just making a drop-down so that it's easy enough for me as an end user to go, you know what, yeah, I want this as date. No, better yet, I want this as time. Well, now we've got two pieces of the pie. We've got a reference table that has associated with it the actual data type that we want to hand along, and we have our larger control table where we have each header and the human readable version of that name. Well, now what we want to do is go into Power Query and merge these two together. So what I ended up doing is I take the new control table where I've got the human readable text next to it for the data type. I've filtered out the nulls just in case the user doesn't actually care about what the data types are for the other ones. And now I'm going to merge. And what am I merging it to? I'm merging it to that new table that I created for the data types and using as lookup the whole name here to pull across and expand outwards the column that actually has the data type as an object. And how do I know it's an object? It's green text and type, and I can click into it and it'll show me at the bottom what data type it is. So now everything's the same as what we did before. We just had to do that loop around, but it will enable the ability for us to control the data types just out of the table. So I've removed the two other columns, and these last two familiar steps, we do a transposition, and then we do the two columns call. And what we end up with this list is you'll see employee ID and type, and every one that I click on, you're not going to see the name of the second one unless you click and follow the link in, and then we'll see the type underneath it. So this ends up being the structure that we want to hand along within the order data types. So what's our last step? Let's come out into our orders form here, and let's change one of the columns, because I can, sometimes I'm too lazy and I don't want to type in the actual call. So we got table transform data type. Doesn't matter that I've got an error here. And now I can come up to the list of lists where we have the text object in there with the data object, and I'll paste in my new list of lists that I created that has the text object as the first argument and the data type object as the second object. Press return, and we can now see we've gone through and we've converted the dates to a time required. The other two dates are date types. We've got text values all over the place. So now with this little bit of a walk around, we were able to create with M language a reference table where I can pull in the data type that I want. I was able to use that human readable text from that reference label in my control table, so as an end user or somebody else, they can select what they want with clear words. And we were able to join those two tables together and wrap them up into a list of lists where the first argument is text and the second argument is the data object that we want. And then we're able to hand that along as an argument directly into the table that we want. So I'll just hit close and load on that. So let's see how well that's working for us. First of all, we have a few date fields down here. Two of them we have set as date, and then the other one I just explicitly told, you know what, treat it as a time variable. So let's come over here and look to see what that query produced. We can see right here, order date is in fact already set as time, and these other two are being treated as date. We have 1998, 97, 96. Order IDs here, they're being treated as numbers, which is great. And employee IDs here, they're also being treated as numbers. Well, what if I change that back? What if I go back to my management table here and let's change our order back into date, just strictly date, and order ID instead of whole numbers, let's make it text. And employee ID, let's make that text as well. And let's refresh our query and see how that produces and what it ends up producing. So what we now end up as a result here, we have order IDs. They still look the same, but when I go and filter on them, it's a text value. So it's coming out of the query as a text value. Same thing with employee ID. It's now being forced as a text value. And we have order date here is now being date, that we can sort on date, and we can sort on the dates for the required ship fields as well. One more time, just to show how powerful this is, let's make everything on here text. Let's just absolutely make everything on this list here text. And we'll refresh that. And we can see here that the order dates, even though they're now formatted a little bit differently, when I filter into them, they're also being treated as text. So it's a little bit of walk around. There is some looping to do. And it seems to work. And thank you again, Rachel, for that challenging question. I had no idea how to do it when you first asked that. I thought I did. I was wrong. And it took me a day to figure out. So I love those types of questions. Thank you, and keep those coming. Thank you for joining us on our inaugural show for the Data Miners Union. I make no guarantee of quality or quantity. What I can tell you is the channel will be posting semi-regularly, perhaps weekly, and we will be focused on content for data mining. That'll cover every topic I can think of, from Excel, M, Power Query, Power BI, perhaps even including some SQL and R as well, and I may have a few guests on with expertise in those areas. So thank you again, and thanks especially to Ruth, and with any luck, we'll see more of you in the coming weeks, months, and dare I say it, even years.